Morning. We have a funny lopsided table to start the day. I hope we're not lopsided in our brains.
We're hoping down there for listing.
We are.
We're what? Listing.
We're not
Yes,
listed.
like a crooked boat.
I've seen part of those people.
I'm sure they'll make their way here. It's okay.
No, they're in the building.
Good.
Do you want someone to go find them?
No, it's okay. We're fine.
Okay.
So we're gonna start the day talking about some pieces of miscellaneous tax sort of administrative changes that have variously come to the committee that Abby drafted into a committee bill. When we get a miscellaneous tax bill that Bill sponsored,
It's been released.
great. If there's other missing pieces, we can fold them in, and then at some point when we feel like we have enough things in there, we can vote it out completely. But it's helpful to just sort of work through each and come to agreement on each piece since they're not particularly related to each other. So we're just sort of getting things done as we go. But it's also a bill that's helpful to have stick around for a little bit in case something else comes up. So Abby, if you could join us and take us through the provisions. I think most of it, things that we have talked about before, but this is the first time I think we've seen language.
That's right. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel. These are all provisions that you have discussed in some form, not with me, but from different advocates in the administration. As a quick summary, this includes the majority of the proposals from the Department of Taxes that are more in the, it's all of the proposals that were presented. I'm trying to find the date. I have it down here, sorry. On the 19th. So it's everything that was in that proposal as well as legal aid and the taxpayer advocates proposal to extend property tax credit filing deadlines. Additionally, to include a notice from towns to all taxpayers of the property tax credit. And lastly, a recommendation from VHFA to extend a beneficial assessment for certain qualified subsidized rental housing, so that that more preferential treatment is extended and is not just limited to a 10-year cycle. But I will walk you through each of those, but those are the main parts. So these are not new proposals. It's just this is the first time you're seeing it in draft format. So on the webpage, there are two documents under my name. I just want to make sure you have the right one because the one we're talking about later is a different issue. So this is drafting request 230864 under my name. Once everyone's there. So that is drafted currently as a committee bill. Sometimes it's referred to as the miscellaneous tax bill. Following last year's choices by the committee, I've changed the title slightly. It's technical and administrative changes to Vermont's tax laws. You certainly can change that title if you prefer. So I'll start by walking through the way it's organized is in that order of what I just went through. So these are primarily tax department recommendations, technical and some policy recommendations with slight changes, and then some of the other advocates that have come in to speak to you. So jumping right in on the first and second pages, I have, as some of you will be familiar with the miscellaneous bills, we often break them up for ease of reading with the asterisks so that you have sort of these different categories within the bill. So the first two sections are the annual link to federal statutes. That is something we have discussed about Vermont's income tax code linking to federal statutes in effect at a certain point in time. So it's like a photograph. This is the snapshot of federal code. It was in effect through the end of a certain year, and that's going to apply to Vermont's taxable income definitions and all of the tax definitions that flow through from the federal statute. So the first section is for income tax. The second section is for state tax, because those are the two areas in the code that have this very distinctive and explicit link up. So that changes the date, and it will pull in all of federal statutes in effect through the end of 2022. I'm not going to jump all the way down to the bottom of the bill, but in the effective dates, it says it only applies to tax years 22 and going forward. So that is not a retroactive. I mean, technically it is retroactive because we're past January 1st of this year, but it doesn't go to tax years prior to tax year 22. So that's what individuals are filing right now. Okay. Moving on to the next few sections, this is taxation of alcoholic beverages. There are some changes happening and that have happened in Title VII for definitions of alcoholic beverages, malt beverages, et cetera. So some of these are conforming changes. The first section is in the sales tax chapter. It's clarifying that sales of meals or alcoholic beverages that are taxed or exempted under the meals tax are not are exempt. So except alcoholic beverages. Let's see. Did I get that right? I might have said that backwards, sorry, because it's an exception to exception. Sorry. So alcoholic beverages, when they are not served for immediate consumption, are subject to sales tax. So in this case, alcoholic beverages are not exempt. As defined in section 4, this is in the meals tax chapter. So moving down to page 3, taxable meal does not include alcoholic beverages that are produced or manufactured by a restaurant or operator and sold for consumption off premises. This is also part of the authority that's been given to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption off premises, so open containers, although they are sealed, right? Sealed containers for consumption off premises. And then,
Can I just clarify with, for some reason, liquor law, I need real examples more than other things. Which made Ready to Drink very fun for the committee last year for folks who weren't on it. So this scenario is if there's sort of a store or a wholesale, sorry, not a wholesale, or a distillery sort of connected to a bar, that the manufactured items that are sealed are under sort of regular liquor tax and the others. And then if it's opened and available to drink, even if it's takeout, it's under meals and rooms.
that's correct, yes. And just to point out, because there are so many different taxes, you would want to hear from Tucker Anderson on more the wholesale side, but sales tax does apply to liquor and spirits and closed beverages when they are not being consumed immediately. And moving on to line 13, so there are actually several changes within this same definition relating to, this is in the meals tax definitions, alcoholic beverages, so the definition is changed, and that's more of a technical change just to line up to the way Title VII has been changing its definitions. Malt beverages, vinous beverages, spirits, or fortified wines, that is all included in the definition under Title VII, so that's more of a cleanup.
Yeah.
There's no wrinkle now that a business is sprouted up delivering virtually everything, including consumables, alcohol or meals. There's no wrinkle in there that we needed to change that wasn't already changed to account for who's collecting and the value that the tax is subject to. That's what I just want to be sure, because I know we've had that discussion.
Yes, you were thinking of the meal facilitator change that went in, I think, 2 years ago, not last year, but 2 years ago. So
but now because it's expanded to alcohol, I just want to be sure that that's clear for who's collecting on what dollar value.
Correct. I will double check because it's not showing up in this language.
Okay.
But my understanding is the change that was
Already
done 2 years ago would have captured all of that, but
Thank you.
I will double check that to make sure because I remember those discussions.
And I remember tax confirming that that was covered.
It should be, that was certainly the intent in the discussions around this because it was during the pandemic that those
Okay.
open container deliveries, I mean, they're sealed, but they're not, they're part of a meal and that is allowed to be delivered now. So
Right.
I will just get that citation for you. my own peace of mind as well.
And so this means that as the GovOps committee, this is a question, you just using the term alcoholic beverages means that as they make changes to what the definition of alcoholic beverages, we won't have to realign the language here.
Exactly. Yes. Okay, so what taxable meal excludes? These are all within the exemptions. I didn't say that backwards. These are all exceptions to the exception. Okay. So that is the extent of the changes to alcoholic beverages. And I believe House General is also looking at the definitional changes. So there, I know that those definitions are being worked on elsewhere. So this would just line it up so there wouldn't have to be a change in multiple places. Everything goes back to Title VII.
And of course, if anything changed in Title VII, that would come into our committee separately to discuss the revenue implications of that.
Correct. Okay. So that's the extent of the alcoholic beverages changes on page 4. There are 2 different sections dealing with refunds. One is in the meals and rooms tax and one is relating to local option tax. So the first is again in meals and rooms tax. And it actually starts on page 5. So this clarifies, because as we have discussed, there is more clarity actually in the sales tax chapter related to refunds having to be given back to the purchaser. In the meals tax chapter, that's being clarified that an operator must prove, in order for the operator to get a refund of tax collected, that the tax was erroneously or illegally collected or computed, and that it will be returned to the purchaser unless it was the operator who made the overpayment. And then it also explicitly authorizes a purchaser to seek a refund of meals or rooms tax if the purchaser can show that the tax was erroneously or illegally collected or computed. This lines up to sales tax, an area that the department had recognized wasn't as clear in meals tax as it is in sales tax. And then section 6 is also related to either incorrect or I think the language is the same, erroneously collected tax. So this is on local option tax, so it's not limited to meals tax. It could meals and rooms. It could be alcoholic beverages or sales tax. And this gets at the concern that you heard about from the department, where in particular this is coming up with the zip code issue, where software vendors that provide the collection software, particularly to online retailers, when they are collecting in a town that shares a zip code with another town, one town may have a local option tax and another does not, even when using that extra 4-digit locator. It's confusing and not always clear whether the vendor is collecting correctly. So this gives clearer direction in statute. So the current law says you follow the sales tax or the meals and rooms tax refund provisions, but there's still the problem of what does the department do when they can't figure out who the purchaser is or can't get it back to the purchaser? Do they still give it to the town? So this language says if the commissioner determines local option tax was incorrectly collected, the commissioner either refunds that pursuant to current statute, so it should go back to the purchaser, or if the purchaser cannot reasonably be determined, then the commissioner deposits those extra taxes according to the state sales tax or state meals tax. So that means it would go to the general fund or the education fund and the clean water fund. So those are all decisions that are up to the legislature to decide. Do you want it to be that way and split in that way, the same way sales and meals tax are?
And then if at some future point someone showed up and said, I'm owed this money, would the commissioner still be able to refund that money?
This does not address that. There should perhaps be let me see if there is no sort of statute of limitations. Yes. So I know I'm just looking at
35?
In the sales tax chapter, it's 3 years that a refund may be requested. And I'm not sure whether that is clear in the meals tax. But my interpretation would be that you would have the 3-year statute of limitations because the default sales or meals tax applies. And then once that time has lapsed, the purchaser has not been determined, then it would be deposited. I think it would be deposited if they can't figure out the purchaser, and then they could be refunded within those 3 years. But we might want to hear more about how that process would work administratively.
If it matches up to current law for non-local option tax, that's good enough for me.
Okay.
Representative Anthony?
Only since the commissioner would deposit it if they cannot locate it. And yet the statute of limitations hasn't run. I don't know whether it would be cleaner if the commissioner were permitted to keep it till the statute ran. And then you wouldn't go in and out, because getting it back out again is a big deal once it's been dedicated to the Ed Fund or Clean Water or whatever. I just thinking of that exigency.
I think those are important clarifications.
Okay, let's hold it and ask the Commissioner.
And for $15.20, it would be a lot of trouble.
I am wary of entering into the realm of lost property and unclaimed property with this, because that is its own.
It's cheap.
Yes.
The state.
Yes, very fine word and its own sort of special administrative nightmare.
Flag section. The next few sections we're still within the request from the department. This is for the computer assisted property tax administration program fees. And this repeals all references to those fees. The department had requested this because these fees are not currently being used or needed. So that is in sections 7 and 8. So those are several references there. Don't have much more on those fees, but if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to. And yeah, section 7 and section 8. Happy to look into those more if you'd like. The next, it's just one section. I'm just scrolling down. Yes, the next section is relating to current use and notifications. So currently, for the different notifications that come from the director of PBR regarding current use, the requirement is to deliver notifications by mail and to the last and usual place of abode. This language strikes those requirements, which gives the director more discretion about how to contact applicants and owners. So it removes the mailing requirement and then makes a few sort of standard drafting changes. So you'll see some gender language and then just some other clarifications that don't make any other substantive changes, just our drafting style.
Yeah.
I just want to flag while we're on a section around current use. I think we'll have an opportunity later this week to hear more from the commissioner on current use. And I want to flag one thing that I've become aware of that might be appropriate to consider in here is last session, we created a new property tax exemption for land owned by state recognized tribes and did not in that conversation address the ongoing lien on that property through current use. And so there's precedent for how we deal with state and federal land discharging that lien, and hope that tomorrow we can hear a little bit more from the commissioner on that and whether there's effects that we might want to consider related to current use and discharging liens that we have exempted from property taxes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm not understanding this change in section 9. This is regarded, I mean, I can only guess at it. I'll just let you tell me what it means again.
Sure.
What's
So
the change?
the change is the requirements for the director to contact current use applicants. So it's really just the form of the notices that are being sent to the applicants. and where they have to be sent. So it's, rather than requiring mailings, it gives the director discretion to do electronic delivery or other forms of notification.
And these notices are what?
So there's several throughout this. So the director has to notify the applicant not later than April 15th, whether they're admitted or not into the program. That's the first change on page.
Is this done every year? April 15th?
I believe that's the initial application, that particular notice.
Okay.
Moving on to page 9. And that's for ongoing determinations about eligibility. So that again, it removes the requirement to notify by mail if the director is changing any sort of determination about eligibility for the program. For communications to the municipality, the director can just provide rather than mail a list of property in each municipality that is taxed based on current use value. And when, moving on to page 10, when the director is removing a property from the current use program, the owner has to be notified. And this again is providing notification of removal, but not mailing the notification. And it also removes because it's not being mailed, it doesn't have to be sent to the last and usual place of abode.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe you heard testimony from the department for the policy reasons behind that, but I could follow up on those if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
And Representative Sims, let's make sure that your technical change just doesn't have a clear fiscal impact, because that's sort of an important part of this construct. But if it doesn't, we can look at finishing that project.
The next change is in section 10, and this is actually, it sort of goes through two sections. It's sections 10 and 11 to be read together. This is also a somewhat technical change, more of a, why is this section in this section? This subsection has been in statute for quite some time. It gives $100,000 to PBR each year to provide lister education and assessment. And it's in the reappraisal statute. So it is just being moved into the assessor education statute.
I'm realizing it might not make sense to have this here right now.
Sure.
Given that we're having a pretty serious conversation about how we reappraise.
Sure. I'm taking. Because that.
Nothing worse than having two bills running that contradict each other.
The current versions, yes, well, they do slightly different things. So section 11 is the reappraisal statute, and you don't see everything, most of what's in this section that relates to reappraisal. Only the first subsection A is shown, and that is to clarify what has been current practice for several years, to pay the $8.50 per grand list parcel fee to municipalities from the general fund. That's been a line in the budget for several years, not from the education fund. And that is for reappraisal costs as well as maintenance of the grand list. And then subsection D was struck in this version because it was being moved into the section that's on assessment education, but I can take that change out, so that if you don't want to muddle different proposals.
Yeah, let's move all the reappraisal stuff, including the move from the education to the.
I wouldn't mind getting that into the general fund there.
No, I think it absolutely makes
know.
sense to move it into the general fund. I'm not objecting to any of the language. I think it all makes sense. I just think we're gonna probably
Just take out that
do a
section.
decent amount of work on reappraisals,
Yeah.
and it would make more sense to have it all over there in case we wind up changing the same stuff.
From a technical standpoint, I appreciate that because that ends up making a lot more complexity in the summer when we do statutory revision. Make sure changes are harmonized. Section 12 relates to appraisals. We're still within appraisal and assessor information. And maybe this would be more appropriate in the other
Yep.
proposal as well. Okay. This is relating to training requirements for assessors. So maybe move from this bill and have on hold whether it fits into the other bill. So those are sections 12 and 13 relating to assessor education and training. And I can move those, just make a note.
And I think section 14 too.
Section 14 is the director reporting to the Secretary of Education on the equalized education property value and then certifying whether the town has completed its reappraisal. So I'll just put this on hold and then decide if you want to have these changes in a reappraisal bill. Section 15 is in a different tax type. So this is the property transfer tax that applies when deeded transfers occur. Also, a few years ago, the legislature put in controlling interests of where there's 50% or more of an interest owned when that is transferred in a business structure. Those are subject to both property transfer tax and the clean water surcharge. This language would create, there's currently an exemption for transfers to organizations that are 501c3s.
Two of them, did you say?
Yes, transfers, the current exemption is transfers to organizations qualifying under 501c3 in the Internal Revenue Code. And that prior to the transfer have been determined to meet this public support test. And provided one of the stated purposes is to acquire property rights, to preserve farmland or open space land. What this language is doing is adding a broader new exemption for transfers between 501c3 organizations, provided they are related organizations and the commissioner does not determine that a primary purpose of the transaction is to avoid tax. And then there's a definition of related organization, which means one organization holds 50% or more of the membership interest in the other organization. And there's some other caveats to that. Then there's further, starting on very top of page 17, there's a further guardrail limiting this exemption that says it only applies on that transfer if the organization that received the transfer, the controlling interest or the deeded property, as long as that property isn't transferred within 5 years after that first transfer. So you have this sort of expected holding period. The organization can't retransfer it. If they do transfer within 5 years, tax will be due on the first and second transfers. There's some explicit language there. And when I say tax will be due, it's both property transfer and clean water surcharge. That is the extent of the property transfer tax proposal. The next section, and this is the one area I wanted to highlight, is slightly different from the department's proposal. This refundable income tax credit change is only applying to the child and dependent care credit. So the department had noted that there were different rules for phasing out the EITC, the new child tax credit, and the child and dependent care credit in terms of an individual's non-Vermont income. So they proposed to add this language at the end, the final sentence starting on line 17, that phases out the amount of the credit when a part-year resident has income that is not in Vermont, earned or received while they're living in Vermont as a resident. Okay. So that is the extent of the tax department's proposals that you have seen. Just scrolling to make sure yes, okay. The next was a request from VHFA. No, should that not be in here? Just checking.
It should be, but I'm realizing that we actually haven't had VHFA
Oh, I'm sorry.
talk about it.
I
And
missed
yes, I missed that too. And so let's hold on that until they can come in and explain it to us, because it is very technical and sort of.
It is.
Do you feel like you could explain it, or should we just wait for them?
I can give you a very short
Okay.
explanation. So this is for non-homestead property that is given a reduction in its property value because it's a qualified rental unit. It's a type of subsidized rental housing. That is the extent of my knowledge of what these properties are. So I would recommend that you hear from VHFA. And there's, under current statute, there's a requirement that VHFA issue a certificate of exemption for these properties. And the way it was drafted has it limited to only it can only be renewed one time under current statute. So this change allows a renewal every 10 years. Limit to the number of renewals. And that is the extent of my knowledge of that.
We'll have them come in, and then we can ask our questions then.
The next change, just make sure this is the right one. The next change was recommended both by the taxpayer advocate at the Department of Taxes, which is an independent office within the department, and legal aid. And I'm sure that you had testimony from them because it's all on your webpage.
We did.
Yes, so this has been an issue that's been flagged many times, that there are these very strict deadlines for filing a homestead property tax credit, October 15th. There are penalties for not filing. So the due date is with the Vermont income tax return, but you really have until October 15th to file. But many folks miss that deadline and then they cannot get a property tax credit, but don't even realize till well after, often because they're paying through escrow as part of their mortgage. So this language gets at that October 15th hard stop by extending the hard stop to March 15th of the following year. So it's almost a full year for folks to still file and get the property tax credit. There's some further guardrails around that. So if a claimant files after October 15th, but before March 15th or on March 15th, the property tax credit is further reduced. So there is a penalty of $150, but it will not be, a negative penalty. So it'll just reduce the benefit those individuals would have had. This is slightly different. It will be issued directly to the claimant. So the town is not implicated. It won't have to go to the town, which would then have to reissue property tax bills. And also the recommendation from legal aid and the taxpayer advocate was that this shall not alter the grand list of the municipality where the claimant's property is located. And finally, there is still a hard deadline of March 15th. So it says any property, no property tax claim may be made after March 15th. So it's almost a full year after the original claim was due.
Abby, on that, the first one there, shall be reduced in amount by 150, not below zero. So if somebody fell into this bucket between October 15th and March 15th, and let's say they would normally get a $500 credit, does this mean they get a $350 credit?
Well, first, if they miss the April 15th income tax filing deadline, you'll see it's already reduced by $15 that goes to the town.
Yeah.
That's to help defray the cost of issuing a new property tax bill. And then it will be further reduced by 150.
Okay, so
your example, yes, your math.
So, but not below zero, that refers to the total tax the total
Oh, I see what you're.
property tax liability, or does it refer to the
Yeah, I can change that draft.
Okay.
I was
Okay.
following B and then moved the amount around, so good catch, thank you. I will fix that. But the credit shall not be below zero. Not the amount.
Right, okay, got it.
Those are my clauses.
And Representative Beck, you're good with the language of that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't recall the testimony at the time urging that we have a penalty essentially of the 150. And I'm asking myself, what is it that we gain other than not rewarding people for postponing. I mean, we're talking about people who obviously had difficulty meeting the deadline at the beginning, so I don't know what the point is. It sounds like a punishment. And it's chump change, I mean, in the overall scheme of things. I just don't remember anybody saying, yeah, we ought to do this.
I was thinking it was more of like a fee, like with the town clerk having $15. I was thinking that probably doesn't really cover the amount of time that it's going to take to deal with that. The 150, I don't know. But it seems more that they're more fee-like than penalty.
Well, none of this is the responsibility of the town at all. This is the state that is dealing with this.
The $15 one.
Yes, yes, but the 150 is not.
Yeah.
Why don't we have the tax advocate in to clarify if there, because I agree, if there's no need to necessarily punish people who are struggling with their paperwork. Okay, so we will hold that for that. Anyone have any other questions on this section?
I would like to know if $15 is enough for the town to deal with the work.
That was already there, right? We haven't changed that piece of statute. That's existing statute. Okay, yeah.
I mean, I wonder, and maybe we could hear from the town clerk, that, this actually maybe reduces the kind of focus on a date to get everyone to, like, I sat in on a select board meeting this last fall and they were wrestling with this question of like, it's hard for people to meet this deadline. Should we be sending more letters out? And I think creating more space maybe actually alleviates some of the concern around folks not filing the declaration in a timely manner. And so maybe I'm hoping we're removing work.
All right, I see that.
Okay, so hearing from clerks or VLCT or someone like that on this section and clarifying the $150 with the tax advocate. And then, do we just have one more section? Okay, so let's do that section, and then Maura Collins from VHFA has magically appeared in the room. Thank you very much. So we can hear from her after we finish this final paragraph.
Great. The final change was recommended by legal aid. It's slightly different than the language that was proposed. So this would require, this is within the forms, tables, and notices that the Commissioner of Taxes provides. The Commissioner must provide suitable claim forms to file for the credit. And prior to June 1st, under current statute, the Commissioner is already required to supply each town with notices describing the property tax credit. This change makes it clear it should be in plain language, then that notice should include eligibility requirements and deadlines. And again, it's already required to go out with each tax bill and notice of delinquent taxes. That said in subsection B, that is now being struck because it gave, and perhaps towns have a thought on this as well, it was giving towns discretion not to include notices if it didn't fit within their mailing. The size of their mailing envelopes or mailers, so that is being struck. So it does require towns to always include these notices. And then in addition, towns have the discretion, or under this essentially encouraged, to distribute the Commissioner's notice in other ways. So that brings C back into the requirements, subsection C of providing it in a different way, but does require a paper notice to every homestead taxpayer. And then the effective dates, these do need a little bit of work. I have some edits to this draft that I will include in here, but those are technical. So this makes the annual link to federal statutes retroactive to the start of this year because it pulls in federal statutes through the end of 2022 and it applies those to taxable years 2022 and going forward. So that's for individuals who are filing right now where they're using federal definitions. And then the refundable income tax credit. So that is now just one section that takes effect retroactively as well. So it would be available for filers starting in 2024. And then everything else is effective on passage.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I have a few things I will get back to you on.
Okay, is there any, if folks have sections that they're gonna wanna think deeper on or have more questions on, please speak soon on that so we can.
Can I ask
Yeah,
one more question
absolutely.
about the homestead tax or application extension? I think I heard you say if the person is eligible for the $150, that it just goes directly to that individual. Is that accurate?
So the 150 would be a reduction of the amount of the credit. That was sort of the penalty. But yes, this language, if an individual is applying after October 15th, but before the next year's March 15th, the credit would be sent directly from the state to the taxpayer.
Okay.
Which is different from current practice where the town reduces the property tax liability by the amount of the credit.
But they would have to probably involve the town in some way, or maybe this information's held at the state, like say, to understand what their total amount that they would be reduced by would be initially, right? So that if it's only $100, they don't send 150.
So the state is doing all of that calculation anyway. The state provides the amount of the property tax credit to the town. So it would just stay with the state and it would be between the state and the taxpayer. You're welcome. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Maura, I really appreciate that you magically appeared. It's amazing. Thank you. I also know that I gave you absolutely no notice to talk through a fairly technical change. So if that worked, okay, great. Thank you.
If you're good.
And welcome to the committee for the very first time. We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm Maura Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. I'm happy to be here for the first time this year, but I have been here other years. I just barely emailed Saoirse an attachment that I'm going to be speaking to, some numbers. If you want to pull it up, it may be coming up.
It'll take a few minutes.
It'll take a few minutes, but in the meantime, I will tell you about a milestone that we have reached. I am now the kind of person who can show up in a witness chair and inform others about what I was a part of 20 years ago.
Congratulations.
I would like to take a moment because this is new for me. And so I'm going to harken back to 2004. Act 68 was in its creation, in setting up homestead and non-homestead categories. Rental housing is a non-homestead use. I don't need to educate you on that. There was, and this is my opinion from a 20-year-old memories of listening to the testimony at the time. I remember the legislature at the time wanting to, I'm going to say protect the residents of affordable housing from a dramatic shift in their tax bill when there are government restrictions that prohibit the ability for rents to adjust to take into account a sudden higher tax bill. This was the immediate change, and they didn't want the tenants' rents to jump up, and they wanted to protect the building that if the tenants' rents couldn't jump up, but the tax bill got bigger, how do we make sure there's enough money for plowing and maintenance and the lights and the painting and the other things?
Can you share an example of a building where that might happen?
Most all of the affordable housing in the state. So we have 14,000 units of government subsidized affordable housing. There's a lot of other housing that's affordable because someone's income is high enough or the quality is poor enough, and that's affordable. But I'm talking about the stuff that VHCB, the Housing Finance Agency, HUD, Rural Development would have put public subsidy into. And a operating budget of a housing development has all the line items you would expect, maybe resident services. It has utilities, taxes, all the operating costs of that building, mortgage payments and insurance and the like. And when the tax line item jumps up, it squeezes everything else because all the different government programs are run very differently, but most of them would have limits on what the rent is, and that's based on what HUD says the local incomes are, not what the operating costs of the buildings are. So the legislature at the time, in their wisdom, did something pretty creative. And they said, well, let me have one more caveat. There are very few, and please don't ask me the number because I'm not that prepared, but there are some hundreds of units, few hundred of the 14,000 where the feds will pay whatever the cost is. And so if the state were to increase taxes, the tenant's payment of their rent doesn't change because that's based on a proportion of their income. And HUD is just going to pay the difference. So you all didn't include them in this program. You kind of said, you know what, if the Fed's going to pay for the added tax burden, then we're kind of okay with that. And so there are 3 small government programs that are excluded from what I'm about to explain. But the rest of the affordable housing is largely included in this tax protection I'm going to describe. And what you did was first, well, not you, some of you, but the legislature said, first off, we don't know what the appropriate government subsidized affordable housing is versus those 3 weird programs versus, I don't know, something else that's going to come up in the future. So the legislature chose VHFA to be the certifier of what is government sponsored housing, what has gotten a public investment. Made sense because we have for 20 years been the owners of the state's inventory of affordable housing. If you ever want to know where the affordable housing is in your state, you could go to housingdata.org. We call it the Directory of Affordable Rental Housing at housingdata.org. You could pull up your towns. You could see how many bedrooms, who owns it, who manages it. Is it elderly only? Is it disabled only? Are there vacancies? By the way, there's not, no matter what you're talking about. And some ideas of the income levels of people who live there. There's a picture of the building, yada, yada. So we've always had this inventory. So y'all said, you know what, let VHFA certify if a property is one of these subsidized properties. And if so, VHFA will give that building a certification and it will say, this property is government sponsored affordable housing. That piece of paper allows up to 10% off the assessed value of that building for purposes of calculating the property tax. So up to 10% because it's a ratio of how many affordable units there are compared to how many units are on the building. We do a lot of mixed income buildings. So if it's a 10-unit building and 8 of them are affordable and 2 of them are market rate, you would get 8% off your assessed value. And the math goes from there.
And your document is up on our website now.
Thank you. So we started doing this. I'll say for the first year or 2, we used to mail out these certificates every year. And then that felt a little inefficient. We noticed that the legislation says that that once we look and agree that this is government supported housing, that can last for 10 years because the government programs last for 30 plus years, sometimes in perpetuity. So the idea that it was going to change every year was not legal. And so we started just sending out the certificates once for 10 years. And if they lost it, they could ask again. But otherwise, they use the same piece of paper every year and they go into their town clerk's office and they submit that. And the town clerk says, yeah, I've seen this before. And they knock 10%, up to 10% off the assessed value. And that is how it works. So time passes and the first 10 years went by. The legislation says, oh, and when that ends, you get another certification. There is language in the statute, and this is, for those who are following along, it's the very end of my 2-page attachment, which is 32 VSA section 5404. And I'm going to read just the last 2 sentences so you don't fall asleep. It says a certificate of exemption is issued by, or a certificate of exemption issued by VHFA under this subsection shall expire upon transfer of the building, upon expiration of the rent restriction, or after 10 years, whichever comes first. So that's just protecting that if you sell the building and it's no longer affordable housing, something like that, this whole deal expires. The next sentence says, the certificate of exemption may be renewed once after 10 years if VHFA finds that the property continues to meet the requirements of the subsection. That's why I'm here after 20 years. Because we did it for 10 years, we recertified once, and in 2024, I'm giving you a little notice, we are not allowed to recertify those properties for a new term. So their rents are gonna go up. How many properties? That in 2024, it's gonna be just over 5,000 apartments in 200 different properties. I can tell you by district which ones it means for you all, but I don't have that handy either. And by 2028, a few years later, it's gonna be 6,600 apartments will no longer have this benefit. So you can see on the attachment that we have broken out those that have received this benefit over the past 19-ish years. Chittenden County looks huge, but that's because this does follow the distribution of where a lot of this housing is. And so there have been over 12,000 apartments that have benefited from this exemption in 477 different properties. Now, my memory is not good enough, and I don't have the hubris to tell you why 20 years ago the legislature said this should happen once and not in perpetuity. I honestly can't say what legislative intent was with that word. What I'm here to tell you is that come 2024, this will be a problem for these properties. And the last thing I want to point out is some of the flawed logic of this word once. I'm recommending that you strike the word once and allow us to continue to play this role and have this program continue until you all want to do much bigger tax reform, which is out of my pay grade. But let me just tell you an example of a housing property that would be affected versus one that wouldn't. If a development, all of our homes, rented, owned, or otherwise, after 20 or 30 years, they need a little recapitalization. They need a new roof, they need a new boiler, they need some energy efficiency work done. This is the reality of building structures. Some affordable housing properties will, their modus operandi is to batch together these capital needs and do a big rehab project all at once. And they will come to VHFA for new loans, and they will say, can I have $2 million because I'm gonna do it all at once. I'm gonna put solar panels and heat pump, switch to heat pumps. I'm gonna, clean out the old outdated kitchens and have more modern things, maybe improve some accessibility, and they're gonna do everything at once. And if that were to happen, they would apply to us usually for tax credits. Technically, the owner changes when that happens. It's a new tax credit partnership now owns that property. They qualify to start the 20-year clock over. So those projects that have done big rehabs are not in the impacted properties list that I have. The ones who are the ones who've been making it work on a limited budget, shoestringing things together, who have not come back for public resources and not needed to apply for more tax credits or do any of that. They're the ones who manage their budgets in a way that they're not doing big upgrades or things like that. One might argue that maybe they need to do a big overhaul. I mean, I'm not trying to put a value judgment on the way that people operate their properties. They're all very unique. Their tenants are unique, their budgets are unique. But those are the ones who have not come back for any public subsidy who are going to be cut out if this change is not made. I also want to lastly make clear that this is not a sunset provision. This isn't saying, all right, in 2004, we gave you 20 years notice that your taxes were going up and you need to plan for it. No, when we finance something next month, they're going to get this benefit for the next 20 years. The provision does not sunset. It is only that we can keep it going for the 20 years. I'm happy to answer questions if I haven't confused you more.
I must have missed something here because why, if the way it's set up is if the people are limited as far as how much they can pay because of their income and the taxes are going up and that becomes, if the Fed covers that, why are we reducing the values by 10% if the Fed's gonna cover?
Because legislature excluded the ones where the feds could cover it.
Yeah.
And the ones who are included in this protection are, for instance, tax credit properties, which is the largest source of how we build housing. Tax credit rents are not set to adjust to each of our incomes.
Okay.
They are set at 60% of the area median income, and they don't care what you earn. And so if you, so there's a limit every year. HUD says, here's how much everyone's incomes have changed in this community. And so rents can go up by that much. And so if taxes go up by more than what incomes have gone up, the rents can't change. And that squeezes the other parts of the housing properties budget. So
And the
when,
Feds don't come in there in that case.
nope, it just creates a burden. And so where the feds do come in and adjust based on a percentage of income, those, we allow that to happen, and they do not get this 10% assessed value benefit. Can I just make sure I'm clear though? I want to say something else. There are tenant-based vouchers that adjust to income.
Yeah.
And they don't qualify under any of this. I should have made that clear, that this is for property-based, we call it project-based assistance. If I happen to have a voucher and I happen to live in this apartment, that landlord pays whatever they pay in taxes and you don't get that benefit. So this is only for project-based assistance where we could drive to an apartment and say, this one's help, not it's subsidized by nature of the tenant who lives there. They get no tax benefit under this provision.
Representative Maslin?
Yeah, general question, thank you. To what extent does VHFA inspect these properties once in a while? How frequently, how thorough, that kind of stuff like that?
Excellent question. For the ones where VHFA has awarded tax credits or has a loan or any of that, we are roughly in there every 3 years. We also go in when there's complaints that we get from tenants. They sometimes know to call us. And we have a rotating basis and we check files and incomes and paperwork just about every year. Every year, the property managers have to send us their budgets and audits and check on that. I want to be clear that we have not financed or given tax credits to the entire universe of the state's portfolio, meaning public housing is right from HUD and goes to housing authorities. We have no financial role in most of the public housing in the state, so we would never be in a property like that. When I look at the database of who's in this and what VHFA touches, I would have to get you the exact percentage, but my gut is that it's probably between 70 and 75% of these units we have something to do with, but I would need to see if I'm right by looking at the database to cross check.
The general gist of my question is, to what extent are you fairly certain that these are still okay, reputable, decent, clean, da-da-da?
That I feel very confident in, because even if VHFA is not in there, I know what HUD does for their inspections of public housing. I know what VHCB does for their inspections. The rural development is another big one. And so we actually, VHFA manages a preservation report where we look at all the housing at risk of loss, which doesn't just mean conversion to market rate. It also means loss to the market. Like it's going to be such poor quality that we lose the units to habitability. And we gather the information from all those federal and state funders. And so I can tell you right now where the problematic properties are, and we're watching them and trying to get them to come in and get some money so that we can protect them.
And last, originally it was a piece of paper that you lugged around for 10 years. Still a piece of paper?
Well, we email it to them. I don't know if they're printing it out and bringing it to their town clerk or if they're showing up like this, but
It's mostly it's an electronic transfer of the same thing?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm done, thank you, appreciate it.
Representative Anthony, did you still have a question?
Just footnote, Barry has signed an MOU to do inspections. We have a rental. And so we do it for properties that otherwise would fall to HUD or some other agency to inspect. The other thing that you didn't say, a lot of these are by federal agreement with the host community off the tax rolls anyway. They're administered by HUD. And so, as you said, there's a direct project ownership between HUD and, so they wouldn't be part of this program if they're 100% HUD units.
Yes, and I believe last I checked, I think there are 12 communities that have their own local inspections. I believe though, like we're still inspecting units in Barry, so it's a duplicate inspection. It's
Yeah.
not a replacement of inspection,
Nope,
so they
agreed.
get, checked a few times.
Yep.
I think, I want to be clear, affordable housing gets inspected and monitored so much more than market rate housing. And so that is not where my concerns are as an affordable housing advocate about where the quality of our housing stock is. It is much more in the private market that may have a municipal inspection system, but most of them do not.
And none of that has anything to do particularly with this language in front of us.
Yeah.
Okay, don't want to make sure we're staying on the focus. Anyone else have any questions about this?
So I really just think you only need to cross out the word once. You can check with legislative counsel if that meets what I'm saying is my intention, but that's what our lawyer thinks.
I do believe there's agreement from legislative counsel that crossing out that word would do that, and that's what we have in our administrative and technical changes bill. And so I appreciate you explaining it to us. And we're going to keep on working on that over the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much for your incredible preparedness and magical appearance.
All credit to Chad Simmons on my staff, who wrote the memo and did all the work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So folks, we're going to keep on working through this. Again, we'll have those folks in, and then probably next round, we're going to go through each section and do sort of a straw poll on each section as we're working through it.
Okay.
Sound good? Okay. Totally changing course. Hi, welcome. Really glad to have you here today. So we have Erica McKellar from NCSL to just tell us about like NCSL and the dollars and all of that. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back in Montpelier. I was able to come last April when the Capitol opened, and it's great to be here at the start of legislative session. There's a great buzz that's always at the start of session, so it's always enjoyable.
Why don't we take a minute to go around and introduce ourselves to you?
That'd be wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, you can introduce yourself. So Emily Kornheiser, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Bill Canfield.
Julia Andrews.
Catherine Sims.
Jim Massland.
Scott Peck.
Kirk Taylor.
Peter Anthony.
I'm Carolyn Brannigan from Franklin County.
Carol Odie.
Carl Demerol.
Great. Well, hi. Well, I'm Erica McKellar, and I am part of the Fiscal Affairs Program at NCSL. And I also get to be NCSL's liaison to the Vermont Legislature, which means I get to kind of be your point person for anything that you might need from NCSL. And I get to come visit you once a year and kind of hear what NCSL can be doing better to support you, the topic areas that you're interested in, and anything that you kind of need. I think some of you are probably familiar with NCSL. We are a bipartisan organization that's really dedicated to strengthening state legislatures and the work that you all do. Kind of as part of that, we do a lot of research, produce a lot of reports, newsletters. We have an online magazine, we do webinars, that type of thing. We also do over 100 meetings a year where we bring together legislators and legislative staff to kind of share information and ideas. Some of those are small kind of issue topic meetings. And then we have our large legislative summit. That's our big annual meeting each year that has different kind of issue area tracks and a lot of different concurrent programming and plenary sessions. And that this year will be in Indianapolis, August 14th through 16th. And then one of the kind of the biggest things that I think we offer is our research services. We really like to think of ourselves as an extension of your legislative staff. So if you have a topic you're interested in, you want to know what other states have done around a particular issue, you can always feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to kind of provide you with information and any support that you might need. I have some big A to Z lists of all of our issue area experts that I can either email or hand out to you. But as kind of your point person, you can always just feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'm happy to make sure I put you in touch with the right people and that you're getting the resources that you need. A little bit about me. I'm in our fiscal affairs program, and I've been with NCSL for 11 years, mostly covering topics around state fiscal conditions and kind of state budget process issues. So, and I staff the National Association of Legislative Fiscal Offices, so I work closely with a lot of legislative fiscal staff. So, yeah, so happy to answer any questions you might have about NCSL, or if you have any research requests that you'd like me to kind of take back with me and have our staff get in touch with you about, happy to do that.
I was excited to just learn about the fiscal threads once I started getting more involved in the fiscal work, and appreciate the opportunity to sort of like talk about revenue and appropriations processes in the same conversation, because we keep them fairly separate.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate how you tend to mix those folks up at your events.
Oh, good. Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. One other thing I did want to mention, we did relaunch our website a couple of weeks ago onto a new platform, and we're still kind of transitioning some information and pages. So if you go to our website and you can't find something, please reach out. It might just not be up there yet, or, it might not be up on the website, but we have a lot of information that's not necessarily up there. So please feel free to reach out. Yeah.
I've been to several of the summits, and I always have a great time, for one thing, but I learn a lot. The plenaries and the separate meetings that occur in the rooms all around the function are phenomenal. I love it, of course, when our Vermont people present. What's the name of the guy who used to be the head of tall man, gray hair? No.
Steve Klein?
Steve Klein. Steve Klein. I don't know what my brain is doing today, but Steve Klein often used to present, and of course it was just so great to see him up there in that different role. Anyway, I could go on and on, but the summits are wonderful.
I'm so glad to hear you that it's valuable.
Since the COVID, but Indianapolis, I've never been there.
There you go.
And in addition to my last week's pitch on the streamlined sales tax, also want to offer this week's pitch on serving on various NCSL committees.
Yeah, we have various committees. You can see a list of them and read a little bit about them on our website, but I feel like the topics seem kind of broad. So if you want to know more specifically what the committees have been digging into lately, I'm happy to put you in touch with. Each of those is staffed by a staff member in our DC office and our Denver office, and they can tell you a little bit more about what the committees have been working on lately. And they do a lot of work shaping our policies around lobbying the federal government. So if you're interested in being involved, talk to me, talk to the speaker, and happy to get you involved in those. So yeah.
Thanks so much for jumping in with us.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, sorry, we have
Just a comment. There have been times when I contacted NCSL for information on various kinds of things. A number of years ago, it was marijuana before we legalized it, or before we to commercial. And you guys correctly responded, you're not advocates one way or the other, but here's a whole bunch of stuff. And the sites, references, whatever NCSL sent, all excellent pieces. I mean, it's very, very, very helpful. So ask them for something.
Great, thank
It's
you.
out there, they'll tell you where to find it. Pro and con, either way,
Representative Sims.
Yes, I've sent you many an email and you have helped me connect to many researchers who helped on many a project, and just so grateful to have that resource. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from others and build on it. So.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that they've been helpful. So good. Great. Well, thanks. Anything that you need, please reach out, or anything that we can be doing better to serve you, please let me know.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Am I correct, just deducing from the name, that this is a service really to state branches, not local governments?
Correct. It's specific to state legislatures.
Because that, as several of us know who have either lived in small towns or run organizations that are helpful to towns of 550 people, they're not heavily resourced. And it's, for them, it's difficult to figure out how to get federal money or how to get grants but that's not a shop.
Not specifically, but we do.
Indirectly.
A little indirectly. We do work on, state-local relations issues. We do get questions, I think, a lot on, what are state governments doing to help local governments, especially around like the federal funds and, learning the ins and outs of the ways that they were allowed to spend some of those funds, things like that. So we're happy to do research like that. We do work with like the National League of Cities and some of those other organizations that do some of that too. So if you do have questions or need anything on that, we're more than happy to dig into it and
Thank you.
see what we can do. So great.
Thank you. Thanks for.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Best of luck with the rest of session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a break until 10:30 and then we're going to talk about reappraisals.